The lobby was silent in the way expensive places always are. Soft lighting, polished marble floors, a massive glass wall overlooking the city. Everything about this corporate office screamed power, money, and control. People in tailored suits moved with purpose. Phones buzzed quietly. Heels clicked against the floor with confidence. And then he walked in. A man in his late 50s. Simple black jacket, plain dark shirt. No assistant. No briefcase. No visible urgency. He didn't look lost. He didn't look impressed either. He calmly approached the reception desk. The receptionist barely looked up. She scanned him quickly, his clothes, his posture, his calm expression, and then returned to her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked without warmth. The man replied politely, "Yes." She sighed, checked the system, and frowned. "You'll need to wait." She pointed toward a seating area near the hallway. No explanation. No eye contact. The man nodded and sat down. Minutes passed. Executives walked past him. Some glanced briefly, then looked away. Others didn't acknowledge him at all. One senior executive stopped nearby and whispered to the receptionist, loud enough for others to hear. "Who's that?" "I don't know," she replied. "Probably early for an interview." The executive smirked. "Well, tell him not to sit there. That area is for management." The receptionist walked over and spoke quietly, but firmly. "Sir, you'll have to move. This section is reserved." The man looked up at her calmly. No confusion, no apology, no argument. He simply stood up and moved to a smaller chair near the wall. People noticed now. A few employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Something about this didn't feel right. This man didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look nervous. He looked patient, like someone who knew exactly how this would end. And what none of them realized, not the receptionist, not the executives, not the people whispering, was that they weren't making a stranger wait. They were making the wrong man wait. And in a building where power mattered more than respect. That mistake was about to cost everything. This office wasn't just a workplace. It was a symbol. The kind of corporate headquarters where decisions made inside glass rooms affected thousands of lives outside these walls. Every detail, from the polished floors to the muted colors, was designed to communicate one thing: authority. People here didn't just work. They competed. Executives measured each other by titles, access, and proximity to power. Who sat closer to the boardroom? Who was invited to which meetings? Who was allowed to walk freely? And who had to ask permission? Status ruled everything. You could feel in the air. Assistants walked quickly but quietly. Junior staff avoided eye contact. Senior managers moved slowly, confidently, knowing they belonged. This was not a place where someone ordinary waited without being questioned. And yet, the man sat there calmly, not scrolling his phone, not checking the time, not showing impatience, just observing. The executive team upstairs was already gathered. A quarterly strategy meeting, high-level, closed door. The kind where only names, not faces, mattered. Inside that room, they spoke about restructuring, cost-cutting, authority, control. They spoke confidently, unaware that the real power wasn't seated at the head of the table. Downstairs, the receptionist whispered to another staff member. "Has he been waiting long?" "Almost 20 minutes," the other replied. "Why hasn't he complained?" She shrugged. "Some people don't know how things work here." That assumption felt safe, comfortable, because in places like this, people believe power always announced itself. Expensive suits, security escorts, private elevators, not quiet patience. A middle manager walked by and paused for a moment. He studied the man carefully. Something about him felt off. Too composed, too unbothered. He leaned toward the receptionist. "Did you check his credentials?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Nothing special." The manager nodded, satisfied. "Good. We can't have disruptions today." They returned to their routine. But the atmosphere slowly shifted. Employees passing through the lobby started noticing how long the man had been sitting there. No calls, No messages. No visible frustration. That's when discomfort crept in. Because confident people usually don't wait quietly unless they have a reason. That silent judgment was happening right now. Not loudly, not aggressively, but through glances, through whispers, through assumptions. Another executive exited the elevator, glanced at the waiting area, and frowned. Why is he still here? He said he has an appointment. The receptionist replied. With who? She hesitated. He didn't say. The executive scoffed. Then he doesn't belong here. That sentence landed heavier than intended. Because this building was obsessed with belonging. Who earned it? Who deserved it? Who didn't? The man shifted slightly in his chair, crossing his hands calmly. His face showed no reaction. No offense taken. No ego bruised. Just patience. And that patience unsettled people. What would you do if you were treated like you didn't belong, even when you knew you did? The longer he waited, the more the imbalance became obvious. The staff believed they were in control. But control, real control, doesn't rush. Time passed. Upstairs, the meeting ran long. Voices rose. Arguments formed. Power struggles played out behind glass walls. Downstairs, the man finally stood up. Not angrily, not dramatically, just calmly. The receptionist looked up, alert now. Sir, you'll need to continue waiting. He met her eyes for the first time. I understand, he said quietly. His voice was steady, grounded, certain. No one in the lobby realized it yet, but this was the moment everything shifted. Because when someone remains calm in a system built on intimidation, it exposes the system's weakness. This office ran on hierarchy, on assumptions, on the belief that authority could be seen instantly. They had no idea they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. And the longer they made him wait, the worse that lesson was going to be. The real problem didn't start with the waiting. It started with how the staff saw him. A senior front desk supervisor stepped out from behind the counter. Mid-40s, perfect suit, sharp tone. The kind of person who believed authority came from enforcing rules loudly. He glanced at the man, then at the receptionist. Why is he still here? He says he has an appointment, she replied. The supervisor let out a small laugh. Not amused, dismissive. With who? The receptionist hesitated again. He didn't specify. That's convenient, the supervisor said, loud enough for nearby employees to hear. He walked directly toward the man. Sir, he said, standing over him, this is a restricted floor. You can't just sit here all morning. The man looked up slowly. I was told to wait, he replied calmly. The supervisor crossed his arms. By who? The front desk. That doesn't mean anything, the supervisor snapped. People try to wander in here all the time. The word wander stung. Like the man didn't belong in this building at all. The supervisor gestured toward the exit hallway. If you don't have a confirmed executive appointment, you'll need to leave. Nearby employees stopped pretending not to listen. This wasn't quiet anymore. The man stood up again. Not rushed, not defensive. I do have business here, he said. The supervisor smirked. Everyone says that. That was the moment the line was crossed. Not because of volume, but because of humiliation. The supervisor continued, voice sharper now. Let me be clear. This is a private executive office. Not a waiting room. Not a public space. And definitely not a place for. He paused and looked the man up and down. Drop-ins. A few people exchanged glances. One assistant looked uncomfortable. Another looked entertained. No one intervened. That silence encouraged him. The supervisor leaned in slightly. You need to understand something, he said. People like you don't just walk into places like this. People like you. That's when the room shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but emotionally. The man didn't flinch, didn't respond with anger, didn't correct him. He simply said, I'll wait. That answer irritated the supervisor more than any argument would have. You're not listening, he said. You don't belong here. Belong. That word again. The supervisor motioned to security stationed near the elevators. Keep an eye on him, he said. If he causes any trouble, escort him out. Security glanced over. The man noticed but didn't react. From a staff's perspective, this was now justified. They believed they were protecting the company, protecting order, protecting hierarchy. In reality, they were exposing their worst instinct. Judging first, power-tripping second, thinking never. The supervisor returned to the desk, shaking his head. Unbelievable, he muttered. Some people have no shame. The man sat back down, still calm, still silent, still watching. That calm made others uneasy, because guilty people usually explain themselves. Arrogant people argue. This man did neither. Minutes later, the supervisor glanced back again, annoyed he was still there. "You know what?" he said loudly. "I'm done with this." He walked back over. "This is your last warning. If you don't leave right now, we'll document this as a security incident." A security incident. That word was intentional. It turned a waiting man into a problem. The man finally spoke again. "Do what you feel is necessary," he said. No threat, no challenge, just certainty. The supervisor scoffed. "Fine." He turned away, already convinced he had won. What he didn't realize was that every word he'd spoken, every assumption he'd made, was stacking consequences quietly. The kind of consequences that don't shout. They arrive calmly, just like the man they were trying to throw out. And upstairs, the executive meeting was about to end, which meant the worst possible timing, for the wrong kind of confidence. The man didn't move, not because he was frozen, not because he was intimidated, because he didn't need to. While tension thickened around him, he remained seated, hands relaxed, posture straight but unforced. No crossed arms, no clenched jaw. His breathing was steady. People mistake silence for weakness. That's why this moment mattered. The supervisor expected resistance. Maybe an argument. Maybe panic. Something that would confirm his assumptions. But nothing came. The man simply watched. Not with defiance. Not with fear. With awareness. That kind of calm makes insecure authority uncomfortable. The receptionist avoided looking at him now. The assistant near the elevators shifted her weight. Even security stood still, uncertain. Because when someone doesn't react the way they're supposed to, it disrupts the script. Time passed slowly. Each second stretched. The supervisor pretended to work, but his eyes kept drifting back. The man was still there. Still composed. Still unbothered. No phone calls. No pleading. No explanations. Just patience. That's what made this unsettling. Anyone could act confident when welcomed. But this man stayed calm while being disrespected. The lobby felt smaller now. Voices dropped. Footsteps softened. People sensed something was off, but couldn't explain it. The man looked around the space, not judging, not impressed. Observing, like someone who had seen environments like this many times before. He adjusted his seat slightly, crossing one ankle over the other. A small, deliberate movement. Not nervous, not careless. Intentional. Security glanced at each other. One of them leaned closer to the other and whispered, "He's not acting like someone who's lost." The other nodded slowly. The supervisor overheard. That irritated him. He walked over again, lowering his voice this time. "You're making people uncomfortable," he said. The man looked up. "I'm just waiting." That was it. No tone. No edge. Just fact. The supervisor clenched his jaw. "You've been here long enough. I was told to wait." Again. Same calm answer. The supervisor stepped back, frustrated. Raising his voice now would look bad. Escalating would draw attention. And attention was dangerous. Because attention exposes mistakes. The supervisor didn't realize he was already losing control. Not loudly. Quietly. The man's silence was doing the damage. Because arrogance feeds on reaction. And he wasn't giving them any. Minutes ticked by. Elevator doors opened and closed. Staff came and went. The man remained exactly where he was. A woman from HR passed by and slowed her pace. "Is everything okay here?" she asked softly. "Yes," the supervisor replied too quickly. "We're handling it." Handling what? A man waiting. That contradiction hung in the air. The man noticed her glance at him, curious but cautious. He offered a small nod, polite, neutral, not asking for help, not seeking validation. That restraint mattered, because people who know their position don't beg for recognition. They wait for the room to catch up. If you knew you were right, would you feel the need to explain yourself to people who already decided you were wrong? The answer sat right there in his silence. The supervisor stepped aside, pretending to check messages, but his body language betrayed him. Tight shoulders, short breaths. This wasn't going how he expected. The man leaned back slightly, eyes moving toward the executive floor indicator above the elevators. The light changed, meeting floors descending. Not fast, not slow, just on schedule. The man's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. A quiet anticipation, like the moment before a door opens and everything shifts. The people who had dismissed him began to feel something else now. Unease, because calm doesn't mean harmless. Sometimes it means control, and whatever was about to happen next. This man had known all along. The elevators chimed, soft at first, almost polite, but in that moment, the sound cut through the lobby like a signal. Heads turned. Several executives stepped out together, ties loosened, jackets half-buttoned, voices still mid-conversation. They were finishing a meeting that clearly hadn't gone smoothly. One of them laughed. Another checked his watch. A third scrolled through his phone. And then they noticed the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that tells you something is wrong before you know what it is. Their eyes followed the line of tension across the room and landed on the man sitting near the wall. The same man who had been ignored. Moved. Dismissed. One executive slowed his step. "Who's that?" he asked quietly. The supervisor straightened up instantly. "Just someone we're dealing with." The word dealing was deliberate, but it didn't land the way he hoped, because the man stood up at the exact same moment. Not rushed, not reactive. Perfect timing. Executives notice that. People who operate at high levels notice timing more than words. The man adjusted his jacket slightly and waited. Still no introduction. Still no explanation. Just presence. A few employees nearby pretended to work while listening carefully. A receptionist bit her lip. Security shifted positions but didn't move forward. Something about this didn't feel like a routine misunderstanding anymore. One executive leaned toward another. Why does he look so comfortable? That question mattered, because comfort in the wrong place signals authority. The supervisor stepped forward quickly, trying to regain control. "There's no issue," he said, smiling tightly. "We're just asking him to leave." Leave. That word echoed. The man looked at the executive team now, not challenging, not defensive. Neutral. The kind of neutral that doesn't need approval. One of the executives frowned. On what grounds? The supervisor hesitated. Just a second. Too long. "Well, he doesn't have clearance," he said. "No badge. No escort." The executive nodded slowly, then looked at the man. "And is that true?" The man replied calmly. "I was told to wait." Same sentence. Same tone. That consistency stood out. Executives exchange glances. People in power are used to inconsistencies. Stories changing. Explanations bending. This man's story hadn't shifted once. The supervisor jumped in again. "He's been sitting here for nearly an hour. It's disruptive." Disruptive. That was bold. The executive raised an eyebrow. Disruptive how? The supervisor opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was no real answer. The lobby wasn't chaotic. No raised voices. No disturbance. Only discomfort. And discomfort isn't caused by waiting. It's caused by uncertainty. The executive turned fully toward the man now. "Sir," he said, measured, "may I ask who you're here to see?" The man met his eyes. "Everyone," he replied. The word landed softly, but heavy. A few people inhaled sharply. Security stiffened. The supervisor froze. The executive didn't laugh. He studied the man closely now. Not his clothes. His posture. His tone. His certainty. There was no arrogance in the answer. Just fact. Behind them, whispers started. That was confident. Who says that? He doesn't seem lost. Someone near the elevators murmured, "This feels wrong." The supervisor felt it too. His earlier confidence drained quickly. He stepped back half a pace, unconsciously yielding space. Executives noticed that too. One of them spoke again, quieter now. "You said you were told to wait," he said. "By whom?" The man glanced briefly toward the receptionist. She swallowed. "He said he had an appointment," she added quickly, voice unsure. The executive nodded. "And did you verify it?" Silence. That silence was loud, because it meant no one had. They had assumed, judged, acted, without confirming. The executive exhaled slowly. "Let's not escalate anything unnecessarily," he said. That sentence wasn't for the man. It was for the staff. Because executives understand something most people don't. If someone stays calm while being dismissed, they usually have leverage. And whatever leverage this man had, they were about to find out. The supervisor glanced nervously at the man. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not panic yet, but the beginning of it. Because the room had shifted. Witnesses were watching. Executives were paying attention. Assumptions were cracking. And the truth, whatever it was now too close to ignore. The man stood there quietly, waiting, just like he had been all along. Only now, everyone else was waiting too. The room didn't get louder. It got quieter. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize they might have made a serious mistake. One of the executives glanced toward the elevator again, then back at the man. His tone softened, not intentionally, but instinctively. "Sir," he said, "if there's been a misunderstanding, we can clear it up." The man nodded slightly. "There has," he replied. That was all. Not defensive, not threatening, just truth. Another executive stepped closer, studying him now with real attention. Not the kind reserved for strangers, but for decision-makers. "May I have your name?" she asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked around the lobby one more time. At the receptionist, at the supervisor, at security, at the executives. Not to intimidate, to acknowledge. Then he spoke. Steven Seagal. The name didn't explode. It landed, like a weight. The executive's expression changed instantly. Not confusion, recognition. Her posture straightened. Her tone shifted. "Steven Seagal?" she repeated carefully. The supervisor's face drained of color. The receptionist froze. Security stiffened, suddenly unsure where they were supposed to stand. The executive took a half step back, not in fear but respect. She paused. "Sir, I didn't realize." Stephen raised a hand gently. "No apologies," he said calmly. That calm made it worse, because anger would have been easier. Anger gives people something to fight. Calm leaves them exposed. The executive nodded quickly. "Of course," she said. "We were not informed you'd be arriving today." Stephen met her eyes. "I was," he replied. A pause. Heavy. The supervisor swallowed hard. He stepped forward, voice suddenly small. "Mr. Seagal, I didn't mean any disrespect. We were just following procedure." Stephen turned to him slowly. "Procedure is useful," he said, "until it replaces judgment." No raised voice. No lecture. Just a statement. The executive inhaled sharply. "We'll take this upstairs," she said quickly. "Please, sir." Stephen didn't move. "Here's fine," he said. That answer shifted everything, because it meant this wasn't going to be handled quietly. And everyone knew why. Witnesses. Stephen turned to the supervisor. "You accused me of not belonging," he said evenly. The supervisor nodded, ashamed. "You asked security to watch me," Stephen continued. Another nod. "You made assumptions," Stephen said. Silence. Stephen looked around the room. "At no point," he said, "did anyone ask a simple question." That sentence landed harder than any punishment. The executive stepped in, tried to regain control. "This is on us," she said. "We'll address it internally." Stephen finally nodded. "Good," he said. Then he added, "But not later." A murmur spread. Executives exchanged looks. If you were in his position, would you demand justice? Or would you stay silent to keep things comfortable? Stephen gestured lightly. Everyone involved stays, he said. The rest may go. No shouting. No threats. Yet no one questioned him. Because ownership doesn't argue. People began to move. Assistants stepped back. Junior staff quietly left the area. The supervisor remained frozen. Stephen turned back to the executive team. You're in a company that talks about values, he said. Culture. Respect. They nodded. But today, Stephen continued, you showed people what really matters here. Silence again. Stephen wasn't punishing them. He was exposing them. Because anger fades. Truth lingers. The executive spoke carefully. What would you like to do next? Stephen looked at her calmly. I'd like the people who judged first, he said, to understand why that's dangerous. No revenge. No humiliation. Just accountability. The supervisor lowered his head. In that moment, everyone understood something clearly. This wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. And the consequences were only just beginning. Because when the owner finally speaks, the building listens. Stephen didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten jobs. He didn't demand punishment. That alone confused people. Because most expected anger. Instead, he chose clarity. He turned slightly, addressing everyone still standing in the lobby. Executives, security, the supervisor, the receptionist. This isn't about me, he said calmly. I can sit anywhere and still be respected. That sentence stung, because it exposed the truth. Respect shouldn't depend on titles, clothes, or access. Stephen continued. But what happens, he asked, when someone without my position walks in? No one answered, because they all knew the answer. He looked at the supervisor. You acted based on assumption, Stephen said. Not fact. The supervisor nodded slowly, eyes down. That doesn't make you evil, Stephen added. It makes you careless. That distinction mattered. Carelessness is fixable. Arrogance isn't. Stephen turned to the receptionist. You followed the culture you were trained in, he said. That culture failed you. Her eyes welled up, not from fear, but relief. For the first time, someone in power wasn't blaming the lowest person in the room. Stephen addressed the executives now. Culture isn't what you write in manuals, he said. It's how people behave when no one important is watching. That line hit hardest, because they were the ones who decided what important looked like. Stephen took a breath. I don't want anyone fired today, he said. A wave of surprise moved through the room. The supervisor looked up sharply. But, Stephen continued, I do want something else. He paused. Not for drama, but intention. I want training rewritten, he said. I want authority based on responsibility, not ego. The executives nodded quickly. I want people taught to ask before assuming, Stephen said. To verify before judging. He looked around once more. And I want everyone to remember this moment, he said quietly, because moments like this shape behavior more than punishment ever could. Stephen stepped back. The tension that had filled the room for over an hour finally began to dissolve. Not because the problem was erased, but because it was acknowledged. The supervisor spoke softly. I was wrong, he said. Stephen nodded once. That's where improvement starts, he replied. No lecture. No humiliation. Just accountability. Executives began organizing follow-up meetings. Security relaxed. Staff slowly returned to their routines, but nothing felt the same. Because now they knew something. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Stephen turned toward the elevators. As he stepped inside, the receptionist finally spoke. Sir, thank you. Stephen smiled slightly. For what? For not being who they thought you were, she said. Stephen looked at her calmly. That's the point, he replied. Never decide who someone is before they show you. The doors closed. The lobby returned to normal sounds. Phones, footsteps, quiet conversations. But the lesson stayed. Because everyone who witnessed that moment learned something important. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to threaten to be respected. And you don't need to look important to matter. Judging others is easy. Respecting them takes character. and in a world obsessed with status. Character is the rarest form of authority. That day, no one lost their job, but many lost their assumptions. And that was the real consequence.